This is not a clip from a concert or a musical act. The story you are about to see is real. It was one of the quietest and most private times in Elvis Presley's last year. It was the last winter Elvis lived, and he went into a studio to record a Christmas song that almost no one had ever heard before. It wasn't planned. It did not happen. It didn't even have a name. Silent Night was a song that brought him close to his childhood, his mother, and the faith that shaped him. Things that almost no one knows about the tape after that are what it did. It went away, and the only thing that kept it alive was luck. This video tells the lost story of Elvis's last Christmas album. The most important things to him in his last year were how it was made, how it was lost, and why it was important. When things were pure. A backward sound. A Christmas message that no one should have ever heard. Read this story all the way through. If this recording is true, it might change the way you remember Elvis for good. In the winter of 1977. A faint voice in the cold. Graceland felt like it was under a quiet weight during the winter of 1977. There were still Christmas lights up, but they didn't have the same warm glow to them. The house seemed big and weirdly empty. There was a heavy, almost holy silence in rooms that used to be full of laughing. Elvis, who was only 42 years old, went through those rooms very slowly, much more slowly than anyone thought possible. People still thought of him as king. The man whose voice filled stadiums and brought microphones to life. Things were different on the inside, though. He was tired and had trouble breathing. Being famous made him feel even more alone. Friends said that Elvis seemed to be in two different worlds that year. He was here, but not right next to us. He was living, but carrying something that no one could fully name. He would wait by the phone some days. Some days he tried to avoid all calls. At night, he would play the piano for hours, making soft sounds that sounded more like prayers than songs. Elvis sang for himself more in 1977 than for other people. December came in quietly. It was cold outside, and Memphis was getting ready for Christmas. But Elvis seemed very far from the holiday spirit. He was lost in memories instead of joy. He was aware that something inside him was shifting. Everything was slowing him down, the long trips, the drugs, and being tired. His voice was still strong, but only people who were close to him could hear how tired it sounded. There was also a deeper quiet below it all. A quiet that didn't sound like it came from the throat but from the soul. A hush that seemed like a sign, a call to rest. During that peaceful winter, he started to have an idea. A label asked for it, but it wasn't a business idea or a plan for another record. There was something private, tender, and personal about it. Elvis had one more Christmas song he wanted to record. But not just any song. As a child in Tupelo, he had heard the song Silent Night while sitting next to his mother in a simple church with wooden floors and soft voices. He wanted to hear it again. It was a memory of Silent Night. It felt good to be alone at night. Silent Night was at home. Not a soul knew he planned to do this. Not the people who worked at the studio, the record company, or even his best friends. This was Elvis's last winter, and he felt the need to go back to the place where it all began. And to the purity, faith, and soft music of youth. In that room, something was about to happen. Something strong but quiet. A moment that no one would hear about for a long time. The weirdest part is this. His last Christmas album, which included his last recording of Silent Night, was almost lost forever. Elvis loved the song Why Silent Night, which he learned as a child. Elvis didn't just think of Silent Night as a Christmas song. You could go back to a world that didn't exist by going through that door. A world with simple prayers, wooden chairs, and his mother Gladys singing next to him in a soft, shaking voice. There was a little boy from Tupelo who sat in a simple church in the middle of winter and listened to Silent Night play over and over again. This was before he was famous, before jumpsuits, and before everyone called him the king. Those were the times that made him who he is today. There were times when they were poor, but there was also love, family, and faith. Back then, Christmas wasn't about big toys and lights. It wasn't about presents or looks. It was about being kind and holding on to the few things that really counted. Gladys would squeeze his hand every time the chorus started the first verse. She almost whispered, "Silent night, holy night." Her voice was soft and fragile, with the kind of feeling that only a mother can carry. Elvis always remembered that sound. He said that church music was the first music he ever really liked, even when he was an adult. It made him feel better. He went back to her because of it. Something in Elvis broke when Gladys died in 1958. Friends said that he cried so hard because he was so sad that it scared them. He changed all the time. After that, every Christmas had a cloud that made him think of the person he lost too soon. Of course, Elvis was tired, in pain, and emotionally distant in his last year, 1977. It's not a surprise that he found himself drawn back to the song that used to make him feel secure. For him, Silent Night was more than just a tune. It was a thought. It was a safe place. It was the only thing that linked him to his mother, his youth, his faith, and the younger version of himself that fame had never changed. People talked about Elvis's health that winter, and his body was getting weaker. He turned to something familiar, soothing, and clean. He didn't tell anyone about it. Later, people who knew him said it seemed like he wanted to leave one last word. That's all he said. One last prayer in peace. Why is it so quiet at night? As his mother's voice echoed through decades of happiness, sadness, and success, it took him back to his childhood house. Elvis would soon, very soon, sing that song one last time. It would not be on a big stage in front of thousands of people, but alone in a studio where no one was expecting anything unique to happen. But what he recorded that night would become one of the most personal and important parts of his work. And almost no one heard about it. The tape that no one remembers, the quietest one of his life. There were not many people in the room that night. The control room is not busy. Not many excited creators. Everyone in the room went quiet, as if they didn't want to upset the moment caught on that fragile reel. The sound coming from the speakers wasn't Elvis from old records. It wasn't the golden tone from the 1950s, which was full of hope and youth. It wasn't the strong voice he had in Las Vegas, when he could soar above bands and roaring crowds. It wasn't that. A voice that was full of memories. A voice whooshed from grief. A voice singing not to a crowd but to himself and the places he could only see. It was possible to hear every breath. Every little stutter showed feeling. Every word made me think of a man looking for the love of a time and place that no longer exists. It was Elvis Presley coming home to himself. People who heard said it was almost like reading a page from someone's diary that they never meant to share because they were being honest. Still, there was beauty in how simple it was, a purity that could never be recreated in a studio. A lot of people spend years trying to be the best they can be. But sometimes the most important moments are the ones you didn't plan. This recording, this night of silence and shaking, wasn't meant to become famous. But it would become one of the most important things he made in his last year. Because Elvis didn't just record a song that night. It was a thought or a memory. A man going back many years to the small church where he held his mother's hand. A man who was looking for the childlike qualities he had lost along the way. There was no practice for any of it. It was all rough. I didn't expect any of it. This song was created when Elvis forgot about everything else and sang like he was a child. It was born in silence and solitude. By chance, the tape held something that no one in the room could forget. The last Christmas song Elvis Presley ever sang. It was weak, honest, and more human than ever. But no one outside those walls knew. And not even Elvis himself. Not the fans, not the reviewers, not even him. People wouldn't hear this last Christmas whisper for a long time. Things would be different then, and the man who recorded it would be gone. Elvis never got to see Christmas, the quiet before the goodbye. As winter went on, the days around Elvis got longer, slower, and more still in a strange way. His walk through Graceland was more like going through memories than rooms. He was worn out in a way that people close to him could feel, going beyond physical tiredness. He still gave it his all on stage. There were nights, though, when his voice shook in a way it hadn't before. He leaned on the mic stand for a little longer than usual at times. He shut his eyes while singing sometimes, but it wasn't out of love. It was because he was in pain. In his last few months, he did a lot of different things. He seemed hopeful one day as he talked about the future and planned new projects. He looked far away and distracted the next second, like he was listening to something far away that only he could hear. In the end, his friends said he smiled less. He used to laugh so hard that everyone could hear it, but now it was quieter. He still found comfort in small things, though. Late-night gospel groups, quiet times at the piano, and memories of Gladys that made her feel both warm and sad. Even though Christmas was coming up, Elvis wasn't getting ready. He had no plans to celebrate. He wasn't even singing the songs he used to love for the holidays. Instead, he kept that secret recording of Silent Night deep inside him. It was a moment that only he understood. He would sometimes be alone in the jungle room with the lights turned down and listen to the air conditioner while snow fell outside. In a way, it was quiet, but I felt alone. People who knew him well knew that this Christmas would be different. It looked like he was thinking about the difference between the life he had lived and the life he had lost along the way. No one thought that winter would be his last. There was no noise during the season. There wasn't a big party, a late-night get-together with friends, or carols playing in the mansion. There was only quiet, memory, and a man moving toward the end of a year he wouldn't finish. He had no idea that the soft, shaking, and longing-filled song he had taped would become the best reminder of his last season, of the Christmas he never got to see, captured in a hymn he had sung for himself and no one else. People all over the world finally got to hear Elvis's last Christmas voice. A lot of time went by before anyone outside the studio knew about the tape. There is no push from the label. The work is being done by a small group of people. They had no idea that Elvis Presley was about to walk in. The room had cool, still air. The way a room sounds when the last note has been played and there is only quiet left after a long day of music. In the corner, one lamp was on. A soft hum came from the mixing board. There were stacks of tape loops that no one had touched in hours next to empty coffee cups. The door slowly opened after that. Elvis went inside. He didn't come with a big deal. Not a group. There was no big statement. Elvis was just walking slowly while wearing a long coat and looking so tired that only the people closest to him could see him. The job engineers stood up straight, shocked. They weren't ready for him, especially at that time of night. Elvis gave a small nod that meant, "It's okay. I just need a few minutes." He then walked over to the microphone, which he had used 1,000 times before. Tonight, though, it felt different, more holy, and personal. He didn't need the whole thing set up. There was no big melody, choir, or orchestra. The engineer asked softly, "Elvis, what would you like to do?" He took a break. He had his eyes down. It was a soft voice. He said, "Let's try Silent Night." The engineer thought about it for a second. It wasn't planned to do this. It wasn't planned to record any Christmas songs, but Elvis's tone, calm, quiet, and almost fragile, made it clear that this wasn't a business meeting. A few changes were made. There was nothing fancy going on, just a microphone lowered to fit his height and some lights turned down to make the room feel cozier. Elvis moved toward her. He put a light touch on the stand with one hand, as if to steady himself. The room seemed to hold its breath until he started to sing. His voice wasn't the big, powerful sound of the 1960s. It wasn't as strong and authoritative as when he was in Las Vegas. It was very different. It was soft, low, and delicate, like a dad singing to his kid or a guy whispering a prayer. Every word was heavy with memories. It seemed like every note was shaking with feeling. Good night. Everything was caught on tape. A little rasp in his voice, a pause between words, and sadness in the tune. It wasn't finished well. There were some flaws, but it was real. It was so real that it seemed like the walls were listening. There was silence in the room. No one moved. They were aware that they were seeing something private. For a moment, Elvis wasn't singing for everyone, just himself. He didn't hold the note strongly when he got to the last line. It was as soft as a sigh, and he just let it go. The room went back to being quiet. Elvis took a step back and dropped the microphone a bit. As a man remembering where he came from and who he used to be, he stood there for a moment. He wasn't the king of rock and roll. He almost said to himself, "That's enough for tonight." He quietly thanked the engineer, put his coat back on, and left the studio. There was no cheering or clapping. There was only the soft click of the door closing behind him. The recording Elvis Presley had just made would be the last Christmas song he ever sang. No one knew that at the time. What's even stranger is that the tape of his last silent night was about to be thrown away. The tape that got lost. How Elvis's last Christmas prayer got thrown away. It was like any other studio after a long night when you wake up in the morning after recording. Notes all over the place on the music stands, wires tangled on the floor, and empty reels stacked next to the console. The quiet time Elvis spent alone hadn't been marked as an official project. There was no labeling rule or papers. There was no note saying keep on the tape box. For the people coming in for the day shift, it looked like just another test reel or an experiment that was done late at night. It was something relaxed and not important. One of the engineers took the tape, turned it over in his hands, and shrugged. There was only a scribbled date on a piece of masking tape on the box. There was no name, song title, artist, or other clue that Elvis Presley's voice was inside. It was usually the same thing in the studio world when someone sent a private tape. Toss away. The reel was thrown away along with other scraps, failed starts, warm-ups, and parts of sessions that were never turned into songs. The trash would be pulled out from behind the bin. Hours went by. As people came and went, they didn't know what had been recorded the night before. Not realizing that Elvis's last Christmas song was sitting with broken tapes that were going to the trash. Then the moment when everything changed. It wasn't until a junior worker, who was caught in the daily rush, saw the bin sitting next to the hall. He stopped for a moment. It could have been the date on the box. It could have been the reel's weight. It could have been gut that told them that tape shouldn't be there. He took it out of the bin with his hand. It was a plain box with no writing on it. There were dusty fingers all over the surface. But it didn't feel right when he held it. He wasn't sure what was wrong with him. Then he took the tape back to the studio and put it on an old machine. The reels began to spin. After the tape hissed, a weak, soft voice filled the room. Holy night, quiet night. He stopped moving. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't scrap. It was Elvis. And not the Elvis that everyone knew. Not the strong, sure voice from the beginning. This was different. A voice with the marks of time, sadness, and kindness. He did not move at all while he listened. He sat back in his chair, shocked by what he had just heard, as the last note faded. The world would have never known about this video if he hadn't stopped at that trash can. Elvis's last Christmas song, which was a quiet return to his youth, his faith, and his mother, would no longer be heard. With care, he wrapped the tape again, put it back in its box, and wrote one word across the top. Do not lose. After that, the broken reel was no longer just another piece of studio junk. It changed into something else. Something hidden, a sign from a man who was running out of time. Still, not many people knew it had been saved. Not the fans, not the press, and not even Elvis's close friends and family.